Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Judaism Without Apologizing. I am here standing in front of the Torah Links Kiruv Center in Lakewood, New Jersey, where I just finished interviewing Rabbi Dovid Sapirman. For those of you who don't know Rabbi Sapirman, he is someone whose life's work of spreading Emunah in Hashem touched the hearts and minds of tens of thousands of people around the world. He is a veteran mechanech with over 50 years of experience in chinuch and outreach, and he is the founder of the Ani Mamin Foundation, aiming to strengthen Emunah in Jews all over the world. And he's become a real powerful force in saving the soul of the next generation. And he travels all over the Jewish world to give shiurim and workshops on how to instill rock-solid belief in Hashem, especially in an age where questions are all over the place and distractions are louder than ever, and falsehood often makes a lot more noise than the truth. And his popular book, Emunah, a refresher course, has become a go-to resource for anyone looking to deepen their clarity and connection to the fundamentals of Jewish belief. And he is a lot more than just a teacher. Rabbi Sapirman is a Rebbe to Mechanchim. He is a thinker for our times. He is a fearless defender of the truths that we sometimes forget to teach clearly. And if you think this is going to be another cute conversation about bitachon and Emunah, think again. This is some fearless passion and some serious fire, so buckle up and enjoy the episode. You are watching Judaism Without Apologizing.
In a world where everyone seems to have not just a microphone, but a megaphone, the voices of our Gedolim, our Rabbanim and Roshei Yeshiva, far too often seem to get lost in the noise. This podcast is here to change that. I'm your host, Hillel Eisenberg. Join me as we sit down with our nation's leaders as they address the ashkafic challenges that matter most, without the fluff and without the drama, with truth that doesn't flinch. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical podcast. This is Judaism Without Apologizing.
Rabbi Sapirman, thank you very much for joining the Judaism Without Apologizing podcast. It's an honor to have you on. Can we begin by you just sort of giving a brief history of yourself and the foundation that you started and sort of the inspiration as to why you started it?
So I grew up in a secular family and was introduced to Yiddishkeit 6 weeks before my bar mitzvah. It's a long story. I went to a yeshiva in New York, run by the two famous Rabbi London brothers. And after 3 years, I went to Philadelphia yeshiva, stayed there for 4 years. I went to Panovich for half a year. And because I wasn't well there, so I came back to America and I went to Lakewood, where I married a year later and learned in the kollel for 5.5 years. Then I became the mashgiach and a rebbe by Reb Simcha Wasserman in Los Angeles. And after that, I came to Toronto, where I've been living for 51 years, and have concurrently been in Kiruv and Yeshiva Chinuch, taught in many of the schools. I was a rebbe in the Yeshivas Ner Yisrael, Toronto, for 8 years, another high school for 3 years. So I've been around. I taught girls for a while. I teach balabatim. So I've pretty much been around. My chinuch experience is 57 years, Baruch Hashem.
Wow. So at what point did you get passionate about learning, teaching, and spreading Emunah?
So it's like this. I went to the Yeshivas Ner Yisrael. Must have been 1991, maybe 92, and I taught there for 8 years. I was a 9th grade Rebbe, but I gave a vad for the Beis Medrash Bachim once a week for the last 7 years, and that was basically the foundation of because I saw from my experiences that the generation is severely lacking in their conviction in Emunah. You can be a maimin, I'll tell you a story in a minute. You can be a maimin and say, I believe it, and live your whole life that way. But do you really believe it? Is it clear to you that there's a Rebbeinu Shalom who gave us a Torah and Har Sinai? Not necessarily. So those lectures were, the VOD was taped on cassettes. Eventually, it was done again in front of a few Bachrim in a series of 10 lectures on CDs. And then it was done over, revised one more time for a different group of Bachrim, small group. And those CDs are called Know What to Answer to Yourself, which is basically what the whole story is. It's not enough to know what to answer to someone else. You have to know what to answer to yourself. It has to be so clear to you yourself that you can answer to someone else, or even if you're not asked. But that Emunah has to be that I know, v'yodata hayom. Not I surmise, I agree to sign on the dotted line because I grew up from, I'm a Maimon. No. V'yodata, you have to know. Know means without a shadow of a doubt. Sefer Achinuch in Mitzvah Chav Hei tells us on the Mitzvah V'anochi Hashem Elokecha that you have to come to the point of the belief in Hashem, the mitzvah to believe in Hashem, till it's clear to you that it's impossible otherwise. Impossible otherwise. And that is how we have to view the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Torah Minas Shemayim, and eventually when you get through the first two prakim, then you have to understand the amitus of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And for this purpose, so these CDs, the first set of CDs deals with Metzias Hashem, existence of a creator, and Torah Minas Shemayim. And also 30 pages about the silliness of evolution, which goes hand in hand with Metzias Habayre, because the whole purpose of evolution was to get around the belief in a creator and a designer. And then when you finish that, then you can easily show the amitus of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And so for all of these subjects, we have audio lectures. But Baruch Hashem, in the last 10 years, I've written 4 books. And the first one is called Emunah, a refresher course. It's been read by about 4,000 people. And it's about the existence of a creator, again, and Torah Minas Shemayim, and silliness of evolution.
So did you see out amongst the Bachrim you were teaching or the people you met that there was a blatant need for this? Or
I've seen it. The first book that I wrote, which was before these books, which was for Torah Masorah, I gave a workshop there, and they asked me to write a booklet about the necessity to teach Emunah. So I wrote there that I've been doing this for 20 years. This was in 2009. So somebody called me up, somebody who was a former Talmud, who said, Rebbe, you were speaking to us about these things 30 years ago. So this is an old story. I saw this long, long ago. Long, long ago.
So what would you say to people who say, hey, listen, we have blossoming, flourishing Beis Yaakovs and Chadarim and schools that are bursting at the seams. You go to Avos Ubanim, you can't get a parking spot. You go to BMG, you can't get a seat. And they're learning and they're davening and they're seeming to follow halacha. Would you jump in and say there is still a major need to upgrade Emunah learning?
Let's put it this way. First of all, this is not my own thought. We have Baruch Hashem, we have Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, Zayin Gesund, and Rebbe Brudny, who gave us a video endorsement, and Rabbi Avram Chaim introduced this in the Psicha to a Torah Masorah convention. He said that the yeshivas are offered many different curriculums, but they have no time for them, for extra curriculums. But there's one curriculum that they are not allowed to skip, and that is the curriculum of Emunah. There should be special courses in Emunah, and Emunah should be in all the limudim. And he was also kind enough to mention L'Shevach, the written and audio materials of the Ani Mammon Foundation. And then you have Reb Zev Leff, and you have Reb Reuben Feinstein wrote in the third book that I wrote. He wrote that there's this generation we see a Yerida Nora'a, an awesome Yerida, a downward slide in Emunah. We see it in this door, especially amongst the youth.
So how is it manifest? Meaning, does he mean that the people who are struggling to remain on the derech are struggling with Emunah, or people who are regular?
If you take the youth aside and let them ask what's on their mind in a place where they're not intimidated, you'll be amazed what questions you hear. You'll be amazed. I teach in the Toronto Cheder for the last 14 years, just once a week for each 8th grade, in Yonei Emunah. I go through the whole series over the course of the year. So 2 weeks ago was my last time for the year. And a bacher stops me on the steps. He says, Rebbe, I want you to know, this is a bacher in a very Torah school, coming from a choshev mishpacha. He said, Rebbe, I want you to know that before the year started, I didn't believe in Hashem. And that is all over. When I got a phone call from a very yeshivish high school here in Lakewood. So the mechaneches wasn't the principal. The mechaneches said, could you come down and speak for our girls? So I said, it's not practical for me to come from Toronto right now. But why don't you take my shutef for Rabbi Pinchas Young, who also lectures on these things, and he lives in Muncie, it's much closer, he'll come. She said, oh no, she said. We heard that Rabbi Young, when he finishes his talk, he has a question and answer session. And our girls have no questions. Anyway, the end of the story was that he went to speak there. And I don't know exactly what he said, although I can imagine. And after the shiur, 3 of the girls that have no questions asked him, could we speak to you privately? And he said, of course. They said, how do we know there's Hashem? I have heard this question many times, many times. I had here in Lakewood about 11 years ago, we had a meeting with elementary school menahalim, a small group, but how to incorporate Emunah even in elementary school, which can be done. So I was told by the person who was running the meeting afterwards that one of the menahalim said to him that just recently his high school daughter came into his study very crestfallen, and she said, Abba, how do we know there's Hashem? He was shocked, but I'm not shocked, because I hear it from the kids. If 2 people are standing by a tree, one is looking up and one is looking down. The one who's looking up says, oh, what a beautiful blue jay. The one who's looking down says, there is no blue jay. I don't see it. Well, if you don't look, you won't see it. I sat at a table once in one of the Kailulim in Los Angeles, in Toronto rather, and I didn't know the gentleman who was sitting across the table from me. I was working on my computer, writing my second book about Torah Sheba'al Peh. And since I'm not totally unfriendly, so I introduced myself. And he introduced himself. He says, you're Rabbi Sapirman. Oh, he says, I was told to look you up, but I didn't. I'm one of your misnagdim. I don't believe in talking about Emunah. Okay, so we spoke for an hour. At the end, he said, I'm not as big a misnagid as I was before. So I said to him the following question. If you never engage your students in these issues, and they wouldn't dare ask you because they know that their questions will not be welcomed, how do you know what doubts and questions they have? And he said, on this, you're right, we don't know.
Wow.
Reb Chatzkel Levenstein, I had the schus to be in Panovich for 6 months when Reb Chatzkel was old but going strong, going very strong. In one of his shmuzim that's copied in one of his svarim, he says as follows. I was aroused today to speak about what I'm going to speak, but something that happened. I met a bacher, I suppose it was from the yeshiva, and I said to him, are you a maimon? Bist a maimon? I said, of course, Rabbi, of course I'm a maimon. He said, of course you are a maimon. Do you know why you're a maimon? And he had nothing to say. He had nothing to say. And then he goes into a whole long shmooze that if you don't know that you're a maimon because the Rebbe Shalom spoke to us Bahar Sinai, then you missed the boat completely. You missed the boat. And he said it's possible that this person will live through 70, 80 years and never know why he should be a maimon. He just attached himself to the Emunah of Klal Yisrael. And he says, and I know that this bacher is not unique. Most of the generation is similar. This is that they have Emunah b'li mashmos, without real meaning.
Well, just to zone in on that for a second. What are the potential negative ramifications of living Len's life? I'm talking where you're stark and you have a whole blossoming family that's all B'nai Torah, and you're learning in Kyle and you're a balabas that's stark, but you have Emunah b'li mashmos. What are the potential negative ramifications of this?
So I'll tell you a story. I was invited to Yavne High School in Cleveland for a Shabbaton, a special Shabbaton, because there was a 12th grade that had many, many questions. And finally, before Pesach, they made a special Shabbaton, and I came to specifically address their questions. They sent me about 60 questions, and I spent their whole number of days just going through their questions and answering their questions. There was a public lecture in Cleveland, in one of the shuls. There maybe were 120 people there. I spoke about, at that time I think I was selling my first book. And I finished and I went out to my car, and a lady followed me. She followed me. And she came close to the car and she began to cry hysterically. Now, I wasn't going to drive off. So I waited until she calmed down and told me what's on her mind. So she said to me, last night, my husband told me he doesn't believe in anything anymore. Now, this lady, when she told me her name, which I, of course, won't repeat, her father is a very chashuv senior Maggid Shira in the United States. And she was probably in her mid-30s at the time of this conversation. And you can be sure that her husband was chosen for her because he was a Metzuyan in yeshiva. And I have no question that he went on the blogs or read the wrong stuff. And since he had absolutely no training in how to answer the questions of the Kofrim, so he believed what they said. Now, I never heard from her again because I think she went for help elsewhere. This is not the only call I got like that. From former Kyle.
So you're saying that the number one obvious ramification is people could literally go off the derech.
That's one. The second one is that the Navi doesn't want us to live mitzvahs ha'anashim melumada. This statement that I'm going to tell you now is in the Baal Shem Tov's writings, which the people think that that the Chassidim believe in Emunah Pshuta. Now, there is no definition of Emunah Pshuta because I don't think it's an ancient term. It's a recent term. But he says as follows: in davening we say Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu. Shouldn't it be Elokei Avoseinu ve'Elokeinu? Was first the God of our fathers, and then it's our God. He says, no, he says, because the Iker is it has to be Elokeinu. He says there's two types of Emunah. Two types of Emunah. Emunah because you accept the Masorah, and you don't ask any questions. You don't ask any questions. You just go ahead, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful. However, there's the chesaron, because it's very dry. There's no hislavus. It's mitzvahs anashim melumada. It's like rehearsed. He's just going through the motions. But when you work through the Emunah, and you see that it's the absolute truth, then you serve Hashem. He says, but in that case, if you work based on your research and you're thinking about the questions, so then you have the chance if somebody comes with a really good question, you can get knocked off the board. So he says the mitzvah min hamufchar of Emunah is both. You need both. Rabbi Bachai says it in Pashas Re'eh, by the I think by the Mesis, that he says Asher lo yodata ata v'avisecha. He says there's two types of Emunah. There's ata and there's avisecha. And the Alter from Kelm says come out the same words as the Baal Shem Tov. This is a fundamental mistake. Rav Wolbe writes in a letter from Stockholm after the war, when he was still in Sweden. A Talmud wrote him an Emunah question. It doesn't say what the question was, but the letter is printed, and the letter says, you probably think that an Emunah question should be chased out of your heart like a hirhur aveira, like a thought of doing an aveira. He says, no, my Talmud, no. This is an opportunity to be mekayim v'yodata, v'yodata. You should know that there's Hashem. This is your opportunity. You think that in a world that Hashemayim misapchim kavoid keil amasa yodav magid rakia, that the evidence of Hashem is everywhere, that you don't have answers available to answer all the questions in Emunah. So that's the second problem. I once spoke to a very chashuv Talmud Chacham in London. I didn't really know him, but I knew someone related to him, but I happened to get an opportunity to speak to him. So he knew what we were doing. So he said, Emunah is very important. He says, but it bothers me much more that the zilzul, the lackadaisical attitude towards davening. People go in, they go out, and maybe they look on their cell phones, or they're not paying attention, they're just davening by rote. I said to him, are you confident that they're sure that there's someone listening? Before you can daven properly, you have to know. That's what Rabbi Lezer said to his Talmidim. She'atem oimdim atem ispalim de'u lifnei mi atem oimdim. You have to know who before you stand. If you don't know that, so that is the problem with davening is almost a universal problem. We hear it from a chanchim across the universe.
Do you think that if you would take a poll of, forget about kids, adults, people everyone struggles with davening, what percentage of them would say the reason they struggle to concentrate in davening is because they have doubts?
They wouldn't say that.
No.
They wouldn't say that.
Hooked up to a lie detector.
They wouldn't say that. It's not a question of lying. They wouldn't say it because they don't even realize how little conviction. This was stated by Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman in a sefer, one of the sforim that was either he wrote it or it was quoted in his name. I think it's called Ella Besomer. He said as follows: he saw that a Godel explained why there's so little attention is paid to tefillah today. He said because people don't realize what tefillah can do for them, what it can accomplish. He said, no, we don't need that. He said if they would have proper emunah that they're standing before Hashem, then tefillah would be a very inspiring experience. These are not my words. These are the words of...
So let me ask you this question. Let's say you have a guy, he's 30, he went to amazing yeshivas. He has a hard time focusing during davening. He knows the proofs. He read Reason to Believe. He's Noah Weinberg. No, he's read a couple books. He knows what to answer basically, but he still spaces out there. What steps should he take? Would you suggest he takes? Meaning, if you're saying Emunah is his problem, so then what steps should he take to solve that issue?
I didn't say that the only reason why people don't daven properly is Emunah, but it's a big part of it.
No, so let's say he wants to explore that avenue, that perhaps the problem is just even subliminal lack of Emunah.
So Reb Chatzkel said, I didn't hear it from him, but I heard it third hand from someone who heard it from someone who heard it from him. He said as follows: when you learn Aleph Beis and you finish, you never go back to learning Aleph Beis. You learned it already. With Emunah, you never take your eyes off the basics. Metzias Hashem, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Ma'amed Har Sinai. That has to be constantly reviewed and refreshed. So if somebody is a maimon because he read a few books, yeah, it's true, okay, good. It will help. I will tell you that I have experience with people that are yeshivalite, that are in their 30s or 40s, that told me that after they heard the audio CDs, that they had a different kind of Rosh Hashanah, a different kind of davening. Emunah is not something you get once and you're finished. It has to be constantly refreshed.
She's saying your eitzah would be to continue learning Sifrei Emunah.
That's one eitzah. There are other issues in davening. Davening is an ancient problem. There's no question. But certainly the lack of proper emunah is a big part of it. And I want to tell you what Rabbi Chanan Wasserman said, and I believe the Baal Shem Tov said the same thing. It's written in the Rabbi Chanan's Yikavetz Mamorim Mipi Shmua, but supposedly it says it in the Baal Shem Tov's writings. Emunah before Mashiach comes is going to be as hard for the door as if in the time of Eliyahu Bahar Carmel, when he made the test with the worshippers of the Baal and in the 10 tribes, and the fire came down and burnt up his carbon. They bowed down. They said, "Hashem hu Elikim, Hashem hu Elikim." Imagine how it would have been if something had gone wrong, and the fire had come down and skipped over Eliyahu's mizbeach and jumped over to the mizbeach HaBaal and burnt up their carbon. Then it would have been a little bit harder to say Hashem hu Elikim. We're living in a door. The old Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Eilish, said as follows. So I've heard. It was never easier to be a Jew than in America. You have total freedom. Total freedom. You want to wear your tzitzis out, you want to make a yeshiva, you can do it. But it was never harder to want to be a Jew than in America. There are so many things pulling us in other directions. And the more we jump after the material way of life of Western society, the more we're into the Gashmias, the less we feel the sense of Ruchnias.
So can I just pause on that point? So isn't it interesting, though, that in Europe, where we were dealing much more with a haskalah, an intellectual battle, so I could hear why Emunah would be immensely necessary to battle that battle. But in America, especially the further removed we get from the 1970s and the Vietnam War and the wave of intellectual rebelliousness amongst especially younger people, nowadays, I do Kiruv on Princeton University. The philosophical attitude that people have is much less
That's true.
fiery.
And therefore, even when they start, even the kids that grow up in Bnei Brak, okay, but if they're growing up in Bnei Brak today is not 50 years ago. There are a lot of
Right, so I'm saying
so the answer is very simple, that if you don't think about it, so you don't have it. If you don't think about questions, if you don't think about how Hashem created you, or if there's Hashem, if you don't ever think about it, you just go through the motions. You buy your Slurpees and your ice cream, and you go to your Seder, and you grow up and you go to the kollel, and then you have children. That's very nice, but you're living like a machine. This is not what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from us. So the fact that they're not intellectually inclined is not a reason not for them not to hear the Emunah clearly. And I know this from experience. I told you that we have an initiative on the first book. We have an initiative where anyone who in high school, 9th grade through Beis Medrash or 9th grade through seminary, who will undertake to read the first book and take a test on it, will get $100. Don't ask where the money comes from, because I still don't know. So we have about an incomplete list of about 200 students that took this test. And one of the questions on the test is, what did you gain from taking the Animamin challenge? The answers are not to be believed. Almost every one of the 200 said, this has been life-changing for me. I was at a chasana here in Lakewood of one of my grandchildren, and someone, we started this about 4 years ago. So a few years ago, I get a message at the chasana that there's a lady who wants to speak to me. So I go over, I sneak behind the mechitza, and I go over to the Ezras Noshim, and she's standing there with 2 daughters. She said, my daughters took the test. I won't tell you which school they were in. They're in a very chashuv yeshiva high school. It's the same one where they have no questions. It's the same one where they have absolutely no questions. He said, since they went through this, they are changed people. There's a bacher in an out-of-town city who was as off the derech as you can get. He found the book in his father's house on a Shabbos. He spent the whole Shabbos reading it, and he's back in yeshiva. He's back on the derech. I heard the same story when I visited in Detroit. I was davening in the kollel, and somebody came over to me and said, my son, the same story. Because if you're just going through the motions, okay, if you were a teenager, you are a 17-year-old good-looking bacher, and there's a very nice-looking girl down the block, and she winks to you. What's to stop a boy from doing the wrong thing? Because he grew up with a lifestyle and a culture. What they don't know won't hurt them. But if he believes that there's a Rebbeinu Shalom who's watching him, that's a different story. You have to live with the Rebbeinu Shalom. V'yodata. And that's not v'yodata. What most of the kids have is not v'yodata. And the adults don't have it much either. But they're on the conveyor belt for so long that they just move along. But the kids are facing the challenges of life.
So let me ask you this question. Let's say a parent, regular, normal parent, has a teenager that is struggling religiously. But they're not sure if it's religious rebellion because stemming from philosophical reasoning, or they're having emotional struggles, or you might say those are synonymous, which
they're not synonymous. But they can go together. They can go together.
So 1 second. So how is there a way to detect where the answer is getting emotional help versus the answer is go see a good Rav or read the Ani Mammon book? Like, is there a way to know, or you should always read the Ani Mammon book?
They're cheaper by the case.
They're cheaper than therapy.
So it's like this. I cannot tell you that I am qualified. Maybe other people are. I'm not really qualified to tell you. I mean, if you have a young man from a broken home, or a home where there's no shalom bayis, or there's a lot of panosa, or there's somebody sick in the family, that's easy to tell. But sometimes there are emotional problems that you don't have an explanation for. But those are the kids who need it more than anybody. They needed to have true emunah more than anybody. They have to know there's a Rebbeinu Shalom running the world. And that's there's a reason for it, even though they don't understand. But otherwise, they have nothing to hang on to. I'm in Yiddishkeit. It doesn't mean anything to me because I'm either attracted to the outside world, which has a tremendous, especially with the introduction of these machines, and they have it on their fingertips. So what's to keep them excited and interested? So the Bakram that I like learning, they love learning. Okay, so the yeshivas are telling them that learn, and it's wonderful, wonderful. But my experience has been that there are many areas that would inspire them that they're not getting in the Moistus, and Emunah is one of the main ones. Now, Torah U'Mesorah, a few years ago, made a program called Emunoscha Balelos, and the Novominsker Rebbe introduced the program. And basically, he said exactly what the program of the Ani Mammon Foundation is. He said, the youth have questions, the mechanchim have no training on how to answer, and they have to be trained. So they made a training program. We've also made training programs. We've been very successful. I get feedback from mechanchim all the time. We had hoped that we would get it into the system. I wasn't zeicher to do that. Rabbi Sosalanta wanted to get Musar for the Balabatim. It wasn't zeicher. It was successful in the yeshivas. So I wasn't successful on that. But there are many mechanchim who use the material that they've learned from us in their classrooms. Many. And it makes a tremendous difference. Is it going to help everybody? Is there any one pill that can cure all sicknesses? No. Can I say that this is the answer? No, I don't say that. But I can tell you that from my experience, that anyone who hears it generally makes a big difference in their lives.
What is your take on large groups in Klal Yisrael who are attempting to inject more life and meaning into Yiddishkeit, especially working people who went to normal yeshivas and are feeling a little bit dull in their Yiddishkeit? And their mahalech is to do a lot of dancing, neo-chasidus, a lot of songs, a lot of swag, a lot of colors, a lot of music videos, a lot of external things to make Yiddishkeit cool and hip and relevant. And instead of needing to watch Goyish celebrities, we could...
It's all very good.
It's good.
It's all very good.
Do you think it has staying power? Is it surface level?
I can't tell you.
No, I'm saying...
But I can tell you that it's not a replacement for Emunah. It's not a replacement for Emunah. Emunah is a must. It's a chiyuv. Emunah, I have a whole likut of gedolim from many generations who said it is an obligation to understand the Emunah with your own seichel. So this is not a replacement for Emunah. Of course it's wonderful to go to a Malav Malko or to a Kumsitz.
But do you think that perhaps the answer should be a larger focus on Emunah so you can go from within and develop an infrastructure?
It's not a contradiction. Let them sing and dance. Let them sing and dance, and let them be trained in Emunah. And with the first night that Ani Mamin gave a public lecture in November 2009, we spoke in the yeshiva of Spring Valley for about 120 people. Myself and Reb Pinchas Young, who was lecturing with us. So I got a phone message after the lecture was over. Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky left me a message. He says, I learned it in Philadelphia. He said, Reb Dovid, I heard it was Givaldic. You should go and speak everywhere. I called him back and I said, Rosh Hashiva, the encouragement is precious, but I want the Rosh Hashiva to know what I plan to do. And that is and tell me if this is correct. I want to give the kids a forum to ask their questions uninhibited and to get solid answers. He said, absolutely. Absolutely.
What you wanted to make that standardized in school, meaning
I did.
Meaning, what do you mean? Can you explain? What do you mean? Have every school once a week?
Every school, if they would devote a half an hour a week, if a kid goes to a yeshiva, especially a yeshiva with a high school and a beis medrash, so he could be there for 7 years. You know how much you can accomplish in 7 years of an extra? Take off a half an hour from learning the Pilpul Achronim, and give them other things that will inspire them. How many kids don't even know what the Crusades were, what we suffered, what we went through? Well, how many kids don't? I mean, I have a relative, shall we say, who is a Mitsuyan Nifla. But when he was 17, his father asked him, do they learn Tanakh in your yeshiva? He said, Rav Tami Musa, Tanakh is for girls. A bacher should not go through yeshiva thinking that Tanakh is for girls. It's one of the Yud Gimel Ikram, Shekol Divrei Nevi'im Emes. Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky said it at a Torah Masorah convention. I heard it on a recording. He said, they didn't give me a theme, so I decided to speak about learning Tanakh. So they didn't give me a theme. So they invited me to speak, but they didn't give me a theme. So he said, a bacher once asked Rab Shraga Feivel Mendelovich, which Beis HaMikdash was Yirmiyahu Hanavi in, the first or the second? So Rab Shraga Feivel answered him. He said, tell me, which one came first, the first or the second? They have to be in touch with the whole picture. The focus is limited in the chinuch system. The focus is limited. And I don't think I'm the man to change it, but they asked the Kotzker, where is the Shekhinah? So he said, wherever you let him in. So that's where we go, wherever they let us in.
What would you say to someone who says, the schools are there to teach Aleph Beis, and then Mishnayos and Gemara and Chumash or whatever, and parents are the ones who should be teaching Emunah to their kids? Will your response be, yeah, but if the kids never learn Emunah, how could they eventually become parents to teach Emunah? But is there truth that Be'etzem parents should be the ones?
Be'etzem, it's true that this was learned at home once upon a time, when there was a different kind of Emunah, amongst the people. I want to ask you, so a lawyer, a very frum lawyer, Olav Hashem, not alive anymore, he told me, he said, my father went through a hard life. He wasn't so medactic anymore, but when my father would put his hand on the mezuzah to go to Kol Nidre, he would pour forth a river of tears. How many people did you ever see doing that? It's not that the Hergish is not there the same way. It's just not the same.
What do you think led to that?
What led to it? First of all, the environment that we're in is not conducive to it. That is part of the problem of Emunah, because it isn't crystal clear to us. That's partly that. And we're being pulled by so many other things. The Gemara says, "Hizaru b'bnei aniyim shemehen teitzei Torah." So I don't know who it is that it says it's Rashi, but it's not really Rashi in the Dorim. It says, "She'ein lehem eisek acher." They have nothing else. The bnei aniyim, they don't have vacations. They don't have extensive wardrobes. They don't have all the things that more wealthier kids have. So they have nothing else. They dive into the Torah. Hizaru b'bnei aniyim shemihen teitzei Torah. But we have so much else is going on. So much else, so many other interests, so many other, there's Redifas Agashmius, bigger and faster and plusher and...
So you're saying the greatest battle, the method to battle the Redifas Agashmius is...
only starts with strengthening Emunah. The last book that I just handed you before is about, it's called Va'avdil Eschem min ha'amim li yoisli. Separated to be mine. Just, the ink is still wet on the book. Be careful, don't get your shirt dirty. The Olam, even the Olam HaTorah, is much more into Gashmias. I was also a younger man here in Lakewood, about 100 years ago. I was a younger man here in Lakewood. When we didn't have a car, we didn't have carpets in the apartment. We lived in an apartment. We lived simple lives. But we felt that we were the Shluchei Rachmana, we were the Rebbeinu Shalom's advocates to bring Kiddush Hashem to the world in a time when learning Kollel was not a standard. But today you have a kid who grew up from the moment he was still sucking on his passy. It was already decided that he's going to go through the whole system and learning Kollel and go to Bris Kordamir and going to learn in Kollel for at least 20 years after his chassan. And it's taken for granted. Nobody ever asks the kids if they would like to do that. Most people don't. It's all taken for granted. It's by rote. Not by everybody. There are people who are very, very astute.
Let me ask you this question. In the last 10 years, I would say, there's been an explosion of a certain type of Emunah book by many different authors. I would say 99% of them, I could be wrong, are stories after story after story of a difficult thing happening and then a good thing happening at the end. And people love to read it because it makes their own situation feel like, hey, there's light at the end of the tunnel, because just like good things happen to all these 12,000 people that I read in the stories that I read, so it'll probably happen to me. Is that Emunah? Is that beneficial, or is that potentially detrimental, where it's like emotional escapism?
I'm not going to say it's not beneficial. It's very beneficial. It's very inspiring. But it doesn't replace knowing that the Emunah is actually true. And for that, you need to be trained. And that's what the Gedolim who have backed us all these years have said. And that's what we do. And we see without a question that it works.
So why are there people who are hesitant to have it standardized in schools?
Number one, because they don't see the problem, because they're looking at the ground instead of looking up at the blue jay. Number two, because they're very focused on what they are doing. I heard a story from a mechanech in Brooklyn. You'd recognize his name. He's a famous person, but of course I won't say it. So he said he was in a certain mosed, and it was probably an elementary school, maybe it was a high school, I don't know. He said, I knew that this was going to be my last year. I was going to be moving on next year. And I knew they weren't going to fire me. And we were at the meeting, the day before school starts, the staff meeting. So the Menahel says, we have to bring God back into the classroom. So I stood up and I said, you know, you had 2 mechanchim who were doing that, but you fired them because they weren't finishing the curriculum. And he said, it's a very good question. And the next subject we're going to discuss is, and he moved on to something else.
One day we'll do an interview in Toronto.
I went to Camp Aguda 2 years ago. I went to Camp Aguda in Toronto. There's a Toronto Camp Aguda. And I asked to speak about my Emunah. And the woman who was running the program was very interested, very, very excited about it. So I spoke to the girls. So she wrote me a letter. She said, everyone should hear this, she said. The girls were asking, why did we never hear the basics of Yiddishkeit before?
So I'm not understanding. Can the whole thing be done in 3 days? Every grade, once a year for 3 days, we just do the whole thing?
It's a process of the whole life of imbibing it and feeling. It's not something that you just do once and then. I've had people that heard the CDs and then they come back and ask me a question about what they heard already. It goes in, but it gets forgotten. It doesn't. It's a process. It has to be focused on. We wrote a beer tefillah booklet, which is on chinuch.org, called Du'u Lifnei Mi'atem Ha'imdim. And over there it brings out Emunah from the davening. When I wrote the booklet, it's a program that can be done. It was written for elementary school mechanchim, so that they could have every day a little bit to explain the tefillahs to the kids. The kids don't have any idea what they are saying. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know the difference between Elokai Neshama and Asher Yotzar. They don't know.
Is that an Emunah issue?
No, but Emunah and Tefillah go together. Tefillah is when you're talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom. But if I'm just mumbling Chinese words, so what connection can I be making with the Rebbeinu Shalom? And then we wrote. I was a melamed for many years with younger children, chumash. So I know that melamdim feel that their job is to learn the chumash. The kids should know the story, and they should know the translations. And they don't realize that in every pasuk you can bring out hashkafa and emunah. So we wrote the first 15 sedras. We never got further, but we wrote the first 15 sedras. A machshava on practically every pasuk to bring out hashkafa and emunah. It can be done, but it's not something that you just do it once. You go to a seminar and some people, they go to an Arachim seminar or Isha Torah or they get turned on. They see that there's something here, and then hopefully they start a career of progressing. But with the kids, it has to be imbibed slowly. It has to be. You also have to see from the Rebbeim and the Moros that they are 1,000% convinced.
If you could spend 10 minutes with a kid about to go off the derech, what would you tell them?
Would depend on the individual. But I might say as follows. In 10 minutes, I can't give over the whole Emunah in 10 minutes. I mean, maybe I'm a bright guy, I don't know. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but I'm not that bright, that's for sure. I would tell him as follows. The Klal Yisrael has been doing this for 3,000 years. We spilled oceans of blood to keep this faith and shed rivers of tears for 3,000 years. I mentioned about the Crusades and the various times in history. And even Bichlal, during the whole European experience over 2,000 years, they hardly had a good moment, most places, most times. I said, you're about to leave an Emunah of 3,000 years. I understand you. You're being pulled in other directions. But at least remember that you left behind the Masoras of 3,000 years, which is the truth, and because eventually the chances are that you'll hit rock bottom. When you hit rock bottom, remember you left the truth behind for whatever reason you gave it up.
Has there ever been a question that baffled you or stumped you?
No, I'll tell you why. I introduced myself as follows. I can answer every question you'll ever ask. Because if I know the answer, I'll tell you, and if not, I'll tell you I don't know.
What was the best question you've ever been asked?
I don't remember. Yeah. But I can tell you that the questions are being asked universally. When Rabbi Young is originally from London. He's been here for many decades, but he's originally from London. So he and I went to London on a speaking tour. Over a week, from Sunday to Thursday, we must have spoken, between the two of us, not all we spoke together, we must have spoken 35 times. Yeah. So we were introduced in Golders Green. There were 2 nights, 2 public drushes. One was from the Chanchim, and one was for the Balabatim. And we were introduced by Rabbonim that neither of us had ever spoken to. And they presented the issues that they see. I said to myself, this sounds like I wrote the script. The same exact problems and the same exact questions. Rabbi Young went to Australia once for 16 days. For 16 days. And did the same program. They're asking the same questions wherever you go. The kids that took the challenge, they're from Minnesota, from Los Angeles, from Montreal, from Waterbury, from Lakewood, from Muncie, from Baltimore, from Chicago. They're from all over and from all different backgrounds. The questions are the same. They either start with, how can we be sure that we're right, or how can we be sure that the others are wrong? And either way, it's easy to explain to them. If you have a little bit of training and you use common sense, hopefully I have another book coming out called Questions Deserve Answers. When I was in Chicago about 5 years ago, so there were 2 types of yeshivas there. The yeshivas where they do let me in, and the yeshivas where they didn't let me in. But there were 2 schools. I spoke in Skokie, and I spoke for the Hanasak Beis Yaakov. Big school. And the girls and the Bochrim sent in their questions in advance. And my presentation that day was going to be only to answer their questions. Now, of course, between the 2 schools were about 100 questions, but of course there was a lot of overlap and a lot of repetition, but there were a lot of questions. So after this was over, I sent the questions to Rabbi Arenfeld and Shlita, who gave me a haskama on the first book. And I said, I'm sure Rashi would be interested to see what the kids are asking these days. So he said to me, if your books don't answer those questions, you have to write another one. So it's taken me 5 years, and this last Sunday we finished editing it.
What piece of chizuk could you give to a couple that's married 6 years and they couldn't get pregnant, and then they finally did get pregnant and the pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and then they got pregnant again and the OB tells them that their child is going to be Down syndrome and they are crushed, and for the first time in their life, this regular normal couple starts having Emunah questions. What would you say to such a couple?
That's because they weren't prepared for this before. It's hard to tell a Baal Yisurin that the Yisurin are also for a purpose. It has to be prepared when life is good, that you are prepared with the Hashkofa. That's the 3rd book is called tranquility and travail. It's about tzaddik v'raloi. That's my third book. It's about tzaddik v'raloi, rosha v'toivloi is a mystery. We don't have the full answer. But people think we have nothing. No, we have lots of answers, partial answers from Chazal, a little bit from Rishonim, but mostly plain Gemaras and Midrashim. Plain. There's a system. The Rebbe Shalom does know what he's doing. And we don't always understand it. We don't always understand it. But if you go to somebody who's suffering in bed and crying out in pain and say, listen, Yisurim are b'makin avanosav shalodam, you're so lucky. It's not ready to hear it then. You need to be trained in advance. The chinuch system is supposed to prepare you for life, not just teach you to make you a professor of Talmud. It's supposed to prepare you for life. It's supposed to prepare you on how to get along with your wife. In some places they do this. In some places they wouldn't dare talk about it. This is, but if you have no training and you start off with nothing, maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But it could be that if you had training, you would have done a lot better.
So does it bother you, based on what you're saying, that anytime that there's a war or something happens in the world, especially in Eretz Yisrael, people run to start talking about Emunah, and Emunah is a major topic, and then once things simmer down, no one talks about Emunah anymore?
Rab Chatzkel was known to be an Ish Kodesh and a Baal Ruach HaKodesh. When he was a Bacher, he learned in Radin under the Chafetz Chaim. And in the early part of the 20th century, there was a girl who was smitten with a dibuk. And Chafetz Chaim sent Rabbi Chonon Wasserman and a minion, together with a minion of people, to chase out the dibuk. And I believe that Rab Chatzkel was one of them. He was only a bacher still. And so the whole discussion is what the dibuk said, and then all the simanim of the dibuk, that's not for our conversation now. But so Rab Chatzkel said he didn't sleep all night. Rabbi Yeruchim, who was the mashgiach in the Mir, said, we heard a connection with the other world. How can you not turn around your life? But Rab Chatzkel said the next morning, so the dibuk escaped by breaking the glass in the window, which is the typical way that they're asked to leave the tortured living person that they've come into. So the whole town of Radin was not a big town, but a whole town was standing around at this broken window and whoa, and they're so excited. So Rab Chatzkel's comment was, but the tailor remains a tailor and the shoemaker remains a shoemaker. I want to ask you a question. We went through COVID. COVID killed 5 million people across the world. COVID. And not only from the Umay Sa'olam, but from some of our best people succumbed to COVID. One of my colleagues in Toronto was in the hospital for 183 days. He was, if I'm not mistaken, most of that time he was, sedated. And it was a miracle that he recovered. A miracle that he recovered. We went through a magefa, a 100% bona fide magefa, a worldwide magefa. We couldn't go to shul, we couldn't go to yeshivas, kids didn't go to school, kids suffered from it, there are kids who are still suffering from those years. And what happened when it went away? Life goes on. Life goes on. See any major changes in the world? I didn't. Maybe there are. I didn't see major changes. I talked to myself. I should have become a much better person also. That's human nature. We get excited, see a miracle. The people in the 10 tribes, when they bowed down by Eliyahu Behar HaKarmel, you think they stopped worshiping Avodah Zarah afterwards? No. They said, Hashem Elokim, we know the truth. But it was a very exciting story. And then they went back to
So let me ask you on that. If tomorrow a hand comes out of the sky and says, I am Hashem, I am true, would anyone become more from regular people? Would they become more?
Did we see open miracles in the last year in Eretz Yisrael? Open miracles. We saw open miracles many times. So there are people that are waking up in Eretz Yisrael, so I'm told. I haven't been there, but so I'm told that there are a lot of people that are waking up. People are, and in America, we've seen the Sinas Yisrael has grown by leaps and bounds. Leaps and bounds. I wrote an article that I distributed a little bit in Toronto called "Why Do They Hate Us?" Anyone who wants it can just send me an email, dsapirman@gmail.com. I'll be happy to send them a copy. Basically, the Torah told us, Rabbi Dovid Sapirman says as follows, in the name of the Vilna Gaon. The Gaon says, this world is a dugma shalmala. It's a facsimile of what's going on above. So Rabbi Dovid explains as follows. If you go to a vegetable store and you see in the window, a fruit store, and you see in the window plastic fruits, you understand that the plastic fruits are just an example, a facsimile of what's inside, the real fruits. What happens in this world is a simon of what's going on in heaven. When you see that Sinas Yisrael increases, it's a simon that there's a kitrug on the Jewish people, and this is why the Sinas Yisrael is increasing. But so we see it, and not sure that enough people are waking up from it. Older people, very old people, say this feels exactly like before the war broke out in Europe when the Nazis were getting all the nations in the world to hate the Jews.
What message of chizuk can you give in closing to the many people watching this to enable them to stay on fire in their emunah in today's crazy world?
This is what I spoke about on Shabbos. I told you there's a group of 20 boys from a yeshiva that came on Shabbos, and I spoke to them. I said, the name of the drasha was, the Emunah is compelling. That is what they have to know. If they don't know it, then they have to do a little bit of research. It's not only my book, but Rabbi Victor Miller wrote about this 60 years ago. When I was 19, I read his first book. And that's a long time ago, let me tell you. I read his first book. Rabbi Avram Chaim Levine said on his tape, on that recording that I mentioned before, he said his father was a Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim, and he learned by Elia Meir Bloch and Reb Mottel Katz. And he never had any questions. But when he saw Rejoice O Youth, Rabbi Victor Miller's first book, it was a tremendous chizuk. It should be required reading for every yeshiva bacher. Now, it's not written in so much of a contemporary style, and there are other books today that deal with these issues. When I was about 30, I called Rabbi Victor Miller and I told him, Rebbe, I thank you so much for putting me on my feet in Emunah. They need to know that the Emunah is compelling. If you use your seichel and look into it a little bit, you're going to discover that it's kuloi emes, and there is no competition in the world.
Rabbi Sapirman, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
It's been an honor.